Welcome to the September 2016 Windows Server update from the Microsoft Australia OEM team. Today we'll be going through some of the latest information around Windows Server 2016. As you've probably started to realize, we're really on the home stretch now for when this becomes available. By the time you watch this, the product will probably have been launched at the US Ignite event, which is happening in mid-September, which aligns fairly well with when this video is being planned to be uploaded to the web. So as we take a look at today's agenda, we're really focusing on four things, but we're going to be spending a very large amount of time on this first section, which is the Windows Server 2016 features deep dive. So what I'll do with this is break it into the different major categories and categories based around scenarios that will be the focus of the Windows Server 2016 launch. And if you watched last month's presentation and you've been keeping up with some of the blog posts I've been making, one of the things that I'm trying to make sure that our channel in Australia really understands is that there are differences between standard and data center with this release, and a lot of the information that you'll hear and see may not necessarily be calling out what version of Windows Server you need for particular features. And that's definitely something I will be doing, is making sure that that's something that's quite clear. So in this video today, I'll be going through and highlighting some of these things. We will be talking about some of the things that are new in Standard Edition, some of the things that are additional features that are available in Data Center. But if you really need to get a good understanding of just what's in Standard Edition, take a look at the Australian OEM team blog site, which I'll reference right at the end in the resources section, because I've been doing a series of articles, there should be about 11 articles in total, that actually cover these details in a bit more depth, but just focusing on standard. So the other sections that we'll be able to wrap up quickly with after this main section is, selling systems and hardware and selling client access licenses. And for a lot of you, this is going to be pretty close to a refresh of what you know, because there's not a lot that's really changing here. There are going to be some minor changes here and there, but overall in terms of client requirements, so for, your server CALs, RDS CALs, things like that, nothing really too major to report at this stage. And for selling systems and hardware, just making sure that that you are aware that obviously things like your OEM pre-installs, your ROK, your system builder / channel OEM product will be available. So just to sort of make sure that you understand that there will be a period where it might take a little bit of time for some of the different SKUs to work their way through some of the different channels, but they're all definitely being targeted. So let's jump in and have a quick look at some of the features that we've got here. So in this case, the main things that I really want to highlight here is if we focus on the two middle editions, we've got Standard Edition and Data Center Edition. And what you'll see with the Data Center Edition is we've got the ability to take advantage of additional features around the storage capabilities, so things like storage replica and storage spaces direct. If you're not sure what they are, don't worry. We'll be covering those in detail as we go through today. I'll talk about some of the new benefits of the networking stack, as well as spending a bit of time on things like shielded VMs and host guardian service. So the ways that if you're in an multi-tenant environment, some of the ways you can start securing your virtual machines. But otherwise, if we ignored those features, there are obviously quite a few enhancements just to Windows Server Standard Edition. So there are storage improvements in there alone. There are networking enhancements. There's virtualization improvements. So in this session today, I'll just be sort of highlighting some of the things that are in one but not the other, so you can get an understanding of what's there and try to figure out which customer's data center is going to be more appropriate for. So if this is the first time you've really been hearing about the feature differences, the important takeaway with this is that it's not just how many VMs conversation do you need anymore that determines whether you go for Standard Edition or Data Center, which was really the 2012 and 2012 R2 message. Now with these feature differences, you need to look at these new features, and if you've got larger customers who have got large server deployments, large virtualization environments, they're probably already data center customers anyway. But when you're talking about customers that have got 1 or 2 servers, not a huge virtualization workload requirement, you'll probably find that Standard Edition is probably going to be more than adequate for them. So then we've got the 2 outliers on this slide. We've got the Essentials Edition over on the left. So we haven't really covered this in too much detail yet in the current OEM material. We're really trying to focus on that standard versus data center edition message for now. But we'll be covering that in more detail as the months progress. And then finally, over on the right-hand side, we've got Storage Server Edition. So in the OEM team directly, we don't really deal with that too much. It's something that's more like sold through the embedded channel, not through the OEM distribution channel. So that's just something that I've kept in there so that if you were wondering, is it still there? Is it available? Will people still be building solutions based on it? Definitely. It will keep going through the channels that it's traditionally been made available through. So these are the top features and the categories that they're in when we take a look at Windows Server 2016. So we'll be focusing on the 3 main headings here. So safeguard your business, improving IT efficiency and productivity, and ready for the cloud. And with each of these, you'll start seeing some pretty big differences versus what we've been able to do in the past with Windows Server. And it gives gives you a good idea of just how much work has gone into Windows Server 2016. For a lot of the things that you'll see in Windows Server 2016, especially some of the Data Center Edition features, a lot of these are things that actually were features that were developed from with the mindset of the Azure team. So in terms of how do we get massive scale, how do we get simplified networking, how do we get isolation between different workloads to make sure that you can have these large multi-tenant environments that aren't going to have too much of an impact on each other. But the good news is that even if you're just looking at a single server for a customer, some of these things scale all the way down. And I'll talk about some of these, and highlight some areas where they really do scale down incredibly well because they are also available as part of standard. So I won't read through this full list here because we'll go through a lot of these in the following slides. So there's no point really just reading them now and then repeating it all again as we go through the next portions. So let's start off with Safeguard Your Business. Now, Safeguard Your Business has been an ongoing theme for Microsoft's SMB customer messaging for the last 2 years or so. So this is something that's been developing over time, and now with Windows Server 2016, there really are some huge enhancements that we can start taking a look at. So let's jump in and start working our way through these. So first up with just-in-time and just-enough administration, well, the question is, well, why is this important? So a scenario to consider is something where it might be something like your DNS servers are co-located with your Active Directory domain controller. The DNS admins need to have local admin privileges to fix issues with the DNS server. But in order to do so, you've got to make those people members of the highly privileged domain admin security group. Now, those of you who do admin work are probably sitting there going, yep. And because what ends up happening is people tend to end up with more management permissions than they really need. And in this case, it effectively gives that person admin control over the whole domain and access to all of the resources on that machine, which isn't necessarily what you want. So with just enough administration, what you can do is configure a role for the DNS admins, and all it does is give them access to the commands they need to get their job done, but nothing more. So this means that they can easily repair a poisoned DNS cache without having rights to Active Directory. Without the rights to Active Directory, they can't browse the file system, they can't run potentially dangerous scripts. And the other thing that we can do here is, we can configure it to these one-time privileged virtual accounts. So they can connect to the server using these credentials and still being able to run those privileged commands. So all up, it means that we get something where we can, have quite a few roles running on the same machine, even without thinking about virtualization, but still be able to give that workload isolation from an administration perspective. So if we take a look at this and take a look at the SMB benefits, well, the three highlights that they've got here are reducing the number of admins on your machines. Well, I'd say maybe we should actually change that message to reducing the number of admins on your network. So especially domain admins or people with highly privileged accounts. We can enhance security control over particular tasks, which we mentioned. And now we've also got improved auditing and reporting of those activities as well. So up next, we've got shielded virtual machines. So what's important to note before we go into this one is that this is a data center feature. So it's not available in standard. So it doesn't mean that if you're only planning on selling standard, you should tune out when I give that warning at the beginning of the slide. Instead, think about scenarios where this might be something that's absolutely critical for you. So in Server 2016, Hyper-V supports the concept of shielded virtual machines. Now, these shielded VMs are protected against unauthorized access using various technologies, such as encryption of the virtual disks. And these extend even to Hyper-V administrators. So even if you're a Hyper-V admin, you might say, well, look, I've got access to the storage where these are kept. You could copy them off and try to fire them up on another Hyper-V environment. And due to combination of things like BitLocker, etc., they're not even going to be able to, you're not actually going to be able to do anything with them because you're not going to be able to get access to them because they'll be protected and encrypted. So what we can do is go through, we can create shielded VMs, we can convert existing VMs to shielded VMs, and what we can do with this is, we're effectively going through and authorizing the release of encryption keys that will be used to shield these virtual machines. So these keys are never revealed to anyone or anything other than to the VM that they're protecting. So these keys are necessary when you're powering on, doing live migrations on a shielded VM, for example. And one of the required pieces here is the host guardian service. And this can never reveal to anything or anyone other than the VM that they're protecting. So this is an important piece of that overall security story. So if someone says, well, look, we want to make sure that someone can't just, even if somehow get physical access, they can't get the VMs off, for example, this is one of the things that will really help to work with that. So if we take a look at the SMB benefits here, what we've got is improved admin security and access to managed application and data. So this is something that isn't going to be for everyone because, as you can probably imagine, you need to sort of go through and perhaps change a few of the workflow pieces that you've got in place for deploying VMs or migrating VMs, thinking about, well, if we're looking at sort of running a mix of Hyper-V servers from 2012 R2 and 2016, well, the shielded VMs won't work on older versions of Windows Server. So there are quite a few things that you need to think about to make sure that you can actually get these deployed properly. So I mentioned the host guardian service in the last slide. So this is one of those required pieces that allows you to enable technologies such as those shielded VMs. And what this does is it helps to keep the trust and isolation boundary between the infrastructure and the guest operating system layers in that virtual environment. So what we've got here is the ability for the host guardian service to validate the status of the Hyper-V hosts in hardware mode, making sure that the hardware meets the compliance that it means. And what it means to use this, the hardware-based attestation mode, is you need name resolution between the fabric domain and the host guardian service domain, and the physical host must have a TPM, it must have UEFI 2.3.1 with secure boot enabled. So this is something that, again, isn't necessarily going to be for everyone because you may have, I know that there are still some people who are still a little bit reluctant around the UEFI versus, can I switch it back to BIOS mode? But in this case, for people who are security conscious, who really need to leverage these capabilities, then being able to leverage host guardian service to then leverage shielded VMs inside of Windows Server 2016 data center, you do need to have that underlying support in the server hardware as well. Now the next one, Windows Defender. This one's much simpler because I think we probably all know what Windows Defender is. But what we get here is the ability to have the Windows Defender at client/agent installed by default when we install Windows Server 2016. So this means that out of the box we'll have protection with Windows Defender. So even if it's something where you've got your own anti-spyware, anti-malware, antivirus software that you do prefer to load on servers, you might have existing subscriptions. This is something that Microsoft will give you out of the box. You can enable it and at least have something in place, even if it's not your longer term preferred solution. But if it is if it is something where you wanted to standardize on it because you've had it running across a variety of different client platforms already, then all of a sudden you've got that same the same engine available on the server as well. So the benefits that they list here, immediate protection, so minimizing security exposure during first run and scheduled updates. You've got always on protection. But from an overall management perspective, one of the nice things about Windows Defender is that we can manage it through the GUI, we can do it through PowerShell, WMI, we can use group policy. So we've got quite a few different ways that we can actually control that depending on how you manage and automate your client environments. So finally, we've got trusted and secure boot as part of the safeguard your business story. And if we work through the process here, what we've got is the workflow. So if we go through how it works, so we need to have a trusted certificate in UEFI that analyzes the bootloader to ensure it's both the right one and that it's signed by Microsoft. In the presence of a rootkit, UEFI wouldn't allow it to boot because UEFI protects the pre-OS environment. So this is something that, if you're thinking some of this kind of sounds familiar, well, it is because these are pieces of technology that started being brought in with Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. So some of these pre-boot environment protection pieces were actually have been down on the desktop side for quite a while because things like UEFI firmware have been in place for several years now. So it's also important to note, though, is that Linux OSs can boot with secure boot option enabled as well. So it's not just something where non-Windows Server operating systems are being blocked. It's something that can actually be Linux. There are certain Linux distributions that will also support this. So what are the SMB benefits? So the important thing here is making sure that when the OS loads when we're loading via secure boot, that we know that the OS is safe and protected, so that we know that the drivers are the drivers that they're supposed to be. Some of the things that occur during this is that it will do timing comparison. So if it sort of notices, hang on, why is it taking an extra couple of 100 milliseconds to do this or that at this stage? Why are these files that I trust replaced with newer versions and I haven't been advised of it? It can actually catch that kind of stuff before the OS even starts, and in some cases even go through automatically repair that, and then give you a chance. It will let you know that it's happened, so you can go through and investigate what happened there. So as we now move on to the next section, improving IT efficiency and productivity. This is one of the things that I think, if we take a step back to Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, probably one of the major changes that we saw there around improving IT efficiency and productivity was much more automation, much more scripting. But for those of you who worked more in the GUI world, then that's where we could say, well, look, now we've got Server Manager as a nice, easy way to manage multiple roles across multiple servers within our network. So we can now start looking at some of the other new capabilities we've got in Windows Server 2016 that really start enhancing that. So the first one that we'll talk about is storage replica. And what you'll see here is we've got some diagrams that talk about that have got storage replica listed. And if we take a look at the different scenarios, what we've got here is that first scenario where we've got New York and New Jersey. Well, they're really close to each other, and as that blue line suggests, there's a river that separates them. So in this case, you'd be able to get very high speed, very low latency networks between two different locations. So in this case, you can use storage replica with synchronous replication, and so the requirement for synchronous replication, off the top of my head, it's something like you need to have sub 5 milliseconds response time, and the recommendation is that you need to have a gigabit of throughput between servers. So we're not talking about something that is going to be particularly applicable to everyone, especially organizations that as soon as it's if it's buildings across the road from each other or across the river, as you see here, okay, it should work fine as long as you've got the bandwidth. But as soon as you start stretching it out, that's where you need to look at that second location, which is Los Angeles to Las Vegas. So in this case, what we're doing is asynchronous replication. So this means that we're not getting that. Basically, it's not sort of waiting for write on both sides before it proceeds. So there is going to be a little bit of latency that's allowed. So Las Vegas in this case would be a close copy but it may not be up to that millisecond accurate like we'd be seeing over on the New Jersey side. So if we take a look at the SMB benefits here, well, I guess the first thing we need to talk about here is that this is this is not a feature that's part of standard. This is only part of data center. So the idea with this is that it's designed to replace, or not replace, or perhaps coexist with scenarios where you may have previously been looking at storage at SANs, for example, that had replication capabilities built in. And the view here is that a lot of the time the cost of the SANs with those types of capabilities versus a general purpose OS like Windows Server 2016 data center with storage replica, the data center story is actually going to be a very compelling story from a price perspective. So this is something where there are a few different types of scenarios, but it's an indication of some of the advancements that have occurred in the storage space. With Server 2012 and 2012 R2, probably the biggest changes to storage were the introduction of, first of all, with storage spaces in Server 2012, but then in storage spaces in 2012 R2 with the concept of things like tiered storage, where you could have your mechanical drive tier and then your SSD tier. Now, if you're looking at Server 2016, that can take it a step further so that you can have basically another layer of tiering, which is for NVMe drives, which are going to be, multiple times faster than a lot of the traditional SATA or SAS-based SSDs that have been in market. So that's still been improved. Things like data deduplication in storage spaces have also been enhanced. So there's definitely enhancements there for the standard users, not just for the data center users. So another thing that you'll see reference to during some of the launch activities is something called Storage Spaces Direct. With Storage Spaces Direct, this is a way of starting to have get the server, so perhaps it might be a Hyper-V cluster, for example, where we can start doing things such as having like what they call a converged Hyper-V environment, where we actually have the storage on the Hyper-V servers, and then we can have multiple Hyper-V servers replicating that storage with each other using that those storage replica capability, so that we can basically have that failover cluster setup using Storage Spaces Direct. Now, to get an understanding of Storage Spaces Direct, again, it's a data center only feature, and it requires a minimum of 3 servers, or 3 Hyper-V servers in this case, if you wanted to set it up as a Hyper-V cluster. So just be aware that it's not something that's really going to be doing anything for a single server or a dual server environment. It's once you start scaling out that it starts making a lot more sense. So as I mentioned, this is where we can start doing things like unlocking the capabilities of things like NVMe devices, and this is when we really need to look at things like high availability without having to have external storage devices like SANs and NASs and iSCSI devices, for example, that are sitting there as the shared devices and are not actually doing anything apart from storage. So the SMB benefit here is that for customers who need these types of capabilities, who previously were looking at SANs or had purchased SANs, all of a sudden with Windows Server and Storage Spaces Direct, we're at the point now where we can say, well, look, you're using commodity hardware to do this. So you've got broader lists of of controllers you can use, of servers you can use, of chassis you can use, of even the disks that can be used here. So the idea here is it just opens up a broader range of storage options and solutions. So it also simplifies deployment, because it's a lot of this, you can either do it as wizard-based deployment or you can do it as deployment via PowerShell as well. It's really up to you how you want to do that. Now, another one which is targeting some of the people who may have things like a Hyper-V cluster, for example, in place, is what's called the cluster operating system rolling upgrade. And what we've got here is the ability to go through and start introducing Windows Server 2016 servers into as cluster hosts in that cluster. And once we get to the point where we've sort of basically converted or moved all of the servers in that cluster across to Windows Server 2016, then we can switch from basically the mixed mode into the Windows Server cluster mode. So in this case, once we make that switch into the Windows Server 2016 mode, we can't go through and then start adding additional Windows Server 2012 R2 servers into that cluster. We can add them as VMs, etc. It's just as part of that cluster fabric that we can't do it. So we can go through and we can get these things going without having to actually have any downtime during the process. So if we take a look at what it mentions, so it mentions eliminating server downtime. It allows more time for upgrading and testing the mixed mode cluster, because you might keep it running in mixed mode for quite a while. And the idea with this is that you can sort of upgrade your other servers, install Windows Server 2016 on them, and then bring them back into the cluster, and basically bring back in the settings that you had previously, and then you can start draining VMs off the running Hyper-V hosts, for example, and keep things moving forward until everything has been updated. So again, this one will go back and when we start talking about stretch clusters, important things with this is that this is something that is going to require your data center, because it's leveraging that replica across the connections here, as you can see. So the stretch clusters site aware. So what are they for? They're designed to provide high availability across sites, but trying to make sure that you do have a degree of business continuity there. In this case, it requires storage replica with synchronous replication or asymmetric storage. So we can go through and so with this one, the important thing is that it is synchronous only replication. So if we take a look at that diagram, it doesn't make it really clear in that diagram, even though it does say so on the left-hand side. Where it says asymmetric shared storage, that's really just the, you can have different types of storage on different sides, because in the main side, you might want, really high performance storage to make sure that, during the times when everything's running on the main servers, that everything's working well, but you may not have the money or the need to have that kind of investment on that remote location, which is really there just in case something goes wrong. So it gives you quite a bit of flexibility, and it's managed with the failover cluster manager or via PowerShell. And the main usage scenarios for this are for Hyper-V and for general purpose file servers. So now let's move on to the next section, ready for the cloud. And this is a big one because obviously cloud integration is a really important part of pretty much anything that's getting released today. Whether we're talking about business products, consumer services, having some kind of cloud integration for management, for reporting, for failover type capabilities is something that's becoming more and more prevalent and that people are expecting. So let's start off and take a look at some of the new capabilities that we've got with Windows Server, starting with containers, so the Windows Server containers as well as Hyper-V containers. So what are they? Well, Windows Server containers bring the agility and density of containers to Windows, so we can do rapid application development and deployment. So what are the Windows Server containers? Well, they offer a lightweight development option for maximum flexibility so that you can go through and get high degrees of isolation, and then Hyper-V containers offer an additional deployment option as well. So they achieve isolation through namespace and process isolation, and in these sorts of deployments, the ability to go through and fully segregate the customer containers to provide appropriate security and resource management is absolutely critical. But what we can end up doing with this is we can start getting much more density of the workloads on the servers. So if we think about the way we normally work with a traditional Hyper-V virtual machine, for example, or a traditional virtual machine, normally we've got a full OS running inside that virtual machine before before we even have to take the application into consideration. When we start talking about containers, we start stripping away some of those requirements, and we end up with shared components that can be used across multiple multiple VMs. And if we take a look at the two methods that they've got here, The Windows Server containers, well, they provide the application isolation through the process and namespace isolation. And what they do here is a Windows Server container shares the kernel with the container host and all of the containers running on that host. So then when we take a look at the Hyper-V containers, they expand on that isolation by running each container in a highly optimized virtual machine. And in this configuration, the configuration of the container host is not shared with the Hyper-V containers. So you can see there that on the left portion of the diagram, you can see that we've got more sharing going on there, whereas with the Hyper-V containers, there's more isolation. So if we take a look at the benefits here, we can increase performance by reducing the resource needs of each instance. We can increase security by isolating the application environments. And we've got much more flexibility and portability between on-prem and cloud deployment, because services like Azure will allow you to bring these containers in. So if you need to move just certain workloads, so instead of thinking, well, I need to move everything that's running on virtual machine A, today that might be, a 12 to 20 gig or greater image that you're thinking, well, I need to move that. And if it's to a cloud service, it might put you off it a bit because you're thinking, I don't have the bandwidth. But if it's just the isolated components of that workload, it might be a much smaller component for you to actually start doing migrations into other locations, for example. So this is something that over time, as we do more of the sessions, we'll be definitely doing much more of a deep dive into this. And it's important to note that in some cases, you'll be, waiting for application developers to provide you with options here. But with Windows Server 2016, there are certain workloads that are designed to work with, containers in a nice, effective manner. So we will be discussing some of those as well. So let's continue on with some of the other cloud integration capabilities. So one of the other things that we've got in here is, the ongoing development of the Azure backup and site recovery capabilities. So this is where we can basically go through and replicate our internal virtual storage, or our internal storage, networking, and compute capabilities, and have replicas of those running up inside of Azure, so that if we ever need to do a failover, we can quickly fail over to Azure and get all of our current workloads up and running quite quickly. So if you want to protect things like SharePoint, Exchange, SQL Server, file shares, Windows Server and clients, etc., this is how we can do that. Now, with this, it's important to note that you do need very high bandwidth for this, because you need to do that initial synchronization of everything before you can actually start leveraging the capabilities. So this is a service where you can't copy your VMs, etc., onto a hard disk, ship it to an Azure data center like you can with some other Azure and Office 365 services. This is something that assumes that you do have a very good connection, very good internet connection, so that you can actually get this synchronization happening quickly and keep it up to date very, very quickly. So once that initial seeding is done, it's only incremental changes that are set at the frequency that you define. And some of the built-in features that are listed here, things like compression, encryption, the retention periods, bandwidth throttling when needed, because obviously, there'll be certain times where you don't want it to be using all of the available network bandwidth. So these all help boost that IT productivity. So we can go through and, some of the scenarios where we can look at with Azure backup and site recovery is, just having it there, in basically powered off, waiting for us to, give it the word to go ahead, and then those virtual machines in Azure will spin up for us and take up, then we can effectively shut down our local environment. So that if we need to do, if we're moving locations, if we need to do server refreshes, it might be disasters that are occurring. So these are the things that we can do. We can do planned failovers, we can do test failovers, we can have unexpected failovers where we just have to get things going up and running quickly because there's been a natural disaster, for example. So this is an important one, and obviously the integration with Windows Server 2016 is an important part of that story. Other things that you've got now available that you can start integrating with are things like Azure Storage. And what you'll find is that there'll be certain roles in Azure where it's easy to start adding virtual storage to different types of services with Windows Server via Azure. So it might be something where you're setting up a cluster and you need to set up a cluster witness. You could set up a cluster, you could set that up inside of Azure, for example, rather than having to do it on-prem. So some of the other things here is you've got the ability to go through and do your deployments where you can scale out using cloud-based storage. So, obviously the catch to that one is you need to have the connectivity. But if you've got customers that are looking at, trying to sort of find the right mix of what they keep on-prem versus what they keep in the cloud, Azure Storage gives a lot of flexibility around how they can actually start integrating the two. With Azure Active Directory, this is something that any of you who've already been working with Office 365 have probably already got, had some exposure to Azure Active Directory already. Some of you may have been setting up tools like Azure Active Directory Connect. Some of you may have taken it a step further and added Active Directory Federation services to the mix. And these are all things that are also going to be working here with Windows Server 2016 as well. And there's probably at this point it's just important to say that these are things that we can continue to keep doing. It's important to understand that if you do have Windows Server Essentials 2016, that easy ability for you to sign in with your Office 365 or Azure AD admin credentials and start synchronizing users, assigning licenses, etc. That feature is definitely still there. But for those of you who want to really start leveraging additional cloud service integration pieces, probably might want to look at using Azure Active Directory Connect, which will need Windows Server Standard or Data Center to run. So what are the benefits here? Well, there's a huge number of benefits that we've got here. So even if we're primarily working with an on-prem organization, there are probably still some SaaS apps that they're using. So we can start getting things like, not just single sign-on into their Office 365 apps and websites, but also into, other SaaS platforms that are out there. So the Azure application portal for AD has got like roughly 2,500, probably up another 100 or so since then, since the last time I looked. So 2,500 pre-integrated software as a service application options. So if you think about your online accounting apps, online banking, etc., the chances are you'll find that they've already been pre-integrated into Azure AD, ready for you to plug into those. Now, the other important part of this is that it also means that we can start getting some great reporting around, access to resources as well through the different reporting options and security tools that Microsoft also makes available in the Azure reporting capabilities. So something that's new for Windows Server 2016 is what's called RSMT, or the Azure Remote Server Management Tools. And what these are a set of web-based GUI and command line tools that we can use to manage Windows servers. So this means that if you're thinking about it from your perspective as people who sell servers to multiple organizations and you have to support those, this is another way that you can start accessing those machines from a secure portal, so that if you've got, if you're managing lots of users with single servers, for example, and you just want to go through and have a single portal to start managing some of these, this might be the type of thing that that might make sense for you. And this is something that works with Windows Server 2016. It's not down level. It's not going to work with earlier versions of Windows Server, but it means that it's fantastic for working with headless servers. So if you're doing some of the minimal installs, trying to really reduce, the usage of additional components in the Windows installation, for the full GUI type experience, all of a sudden this means that it's very, very easy for you to use it using a consistent experience across the different servers. So this means that you get that simplified system management, you get reporting capabilities, and you can manage both cloud-based and local servers using this, because this could be something where you might be managing some of the VMs that you're running inside of Azure, for example, as well as people's on-premise servers, all from that one portal. So just now wrapping up with the final slide on the Azure and the Microsoft Cloud integration story is the operations management suite. And what this will provide is effectively it gives us log analytics as well as other capabilities where we can start getting servers to report information through so that we can start tracking, things that are, event log activities, etc. And what happens with OMS is that it starts giving us reports around, servers that may be out of compliance with your requirements, ones that have got patches missing, for example. And you can start getting this information. But with this one, this is generally, think about this one as happening more across, something that you'd be doing on a per organizational basis rather than, rolling a bunch of reporting in from different clients. But it's something where you could potentially look at it for that. It's not something where I've seen a lot of documentation that covers the one service, multiple customers, as opposed to a service per customer. Now, the best thing with OMS to get you familiar with this is if you go to the Azure portal, and you can actually set up an operations manager suite trial for free, but you can keep it going because there's a basic tier that, provided you're under the resource or the limits that it provides, it actually runs as a free service for you. So it will give you some basic capabilities there. But of course, if you're talking about large environments or large number of servers from different locations coming in, you're probably going to exceed the logging capabilities, etc., at that free tier. But it's definitely worth looking at, even if you just use it with your own server, your own internal servers to begin with, to get an understanding of exactly what it does. So some of the things that we can start doing with this is we can take a look at the, they call them the operational insights. You've got custom dashboards. There's a solution gallery. So it says, oh, you're not doing this. Here are some suggested ways to do this. So we've got, we end up getting enhanced protection of workloads because it's telling us when things aren't working the way they should. It tells us when things aren't protected the way they should be. So even if we take it all the way back to earlier in the recording where I spoke about Windows Defender now being available on server. So this is something where if Windows Defender or another recognized anti-malware solution isn't installed, it can alert you, hey, you've got servers that are sitting there unprotected without these agents installed. So OMS is a great cloud-based way for us to be able to get that information, but be able to leverage the power of Azure's compute platform to actually analyze all of that information, bring it together, give us recommendations, and a whole lot more. So that's really just the product piece out of the way. So now let's switch gears a little bit and just talk about the ways that you license and sell Windows Server 2016. And we can go through this fairly quickly because, as I mentioned right at the beginning, a lot of this is going to be very, very similar to things that you've looked at before. So first up, maximizing profitability with Windows Server. So if we take a look at it, one of the ongoing pieces here with Windows Server is, well, what is it you do with Windows Server? So you've got the hardware, you've got the software, but then it's the solutions that you're building on top of that. So with all the additional functionality that Microsoft is building into Windows Server, the goal there is to make sure that for you as partners that there's a lot of additional services that you can look at attaching there. So in some cases, you may be able to leverage features that the customers needed for a long time, but may have only been available through expensive add-on solutions. So now if it's something that's in Windows Server 2016, it might be something where you can say, look, you've got the software, let's just enable those services and we'll just do it as part of our deployment service for you. So obviously there's a lot that you can do as part of that. But so, your deployment, your ongoing management and maintenance, as well as rolling out new solutions over time. So the different ways you can sell, well, you've got the server system builder license. So this is where you get the software with the media and the keys. Or the other option that you've got is when it's coming from the OEM. So when it's coming from the OEM, it's generally got it's associated with that OEM's server platform. So you can have it pre-installed or using the reseller option kit, just depending on what the option is for that server platform or the server vendor that you're working with. But the good thing when you're working with the pre-install or ROK is, a lot of the work has been done by the OEM to make sure that, drivers, management packs and tools, etc., are all installed, so that once you do get things up and running, it's very easy to get all the latest updates from the OEM vendor side, not just from the Windows Server update piece. So what are the differences between the OEM and volume licensing? Well, nothing really changing here between what we've seen before versus this one, but the Windows Server, if it's pre-installed or ROK, it's tied to the hardware, and as I mentioned, the OEMs can save a bit of time up front for that initial deployment. So you can sell the you can sell the system builder license individually. The OEM kit includes media. You've got the product keys. You've got the certificate of authenticity, and the OEM licenses are supported by the server manufacturer. So if you're having hardware, if you're having an issue and you can't figure out is it hardware, is it software, from a Windows perspective, the OEM can take full ownership of that for you. Now on the volume licensing side, you've got volume licenses that can be reassigned to different hardware every 90 days, but it's also important to note there are now certain SKUs available for Windows Server that do include license reassignment. So if license reassignment was the reason that you were buying volume license copies in the past, it's really important to note that you can go through and you'll see that it's being expanded. So at the moment, it's really only with Data Center on 2012 R2. With Windows Server 2016, it looks like it is going to go broader than that. So keep an eye on that if that's something that's important for you. So with the VL side, remember that you do need to download media and you need to access the appropriate keys from the Volume License Software Center. And other things that are important with these is that you've also got, you can apply software assurance to both the volume license purchase and to the OEM software purchase. So, important to note that if software assurance is important for your customer, definitely take a look at that. And both your OEM and volume licensing have got the same downgrade and virtualization rights. So around moving virtual machines between hosts, as long as the hosts are appropriately licensed. But the difference in the downgrade story is that with the OEM software, it's, even though you're granted the same right, it's up to the customer to provide the down level media and product key. Whereas on the volume license side, Microsoft will have, several versions of several older versions of Windows Server and appropriate product keys that the customer can download it and use. That's one of the benefits of volume licensing. So what about on the client side? Has anything really changed there? Well, the good news is that no. What's correct today continues to be correct moving forward. And if we take a look at why you should be adding Windows Server CALs, well, probably the most important one is that, there's no, like Server 2012 and 2012 R2, there are no CALs included with the base product of Windows Server Standard or Data Center. So you should be buying CALs in most cases when you are selling new versions of servers, even into a current environment, if they don't have that version of Windows Server already. So if you take a look here, you know that you've got your customers covered, and the CALs need to be purchased separately, as I mentioned, and the general recommendation is just making sure that people know that they need CALs when you are going through and doing the quoting, so that it's not something that you have to try to convince them of later on when they are saying, but we weren't expecting that cost. So so we've got different types of CALs. We've got the we've got the per device CAL, we've got the per user CAL. These things haven't really changed over time, but when people ask, well, what would be the thing that determines whether or not I need a CAL? I think the gray box on the left does a good job of describing this one. It's CALs are required for users or devices that have direct access to the server. So that's kind of a good one. And with CALs, you've got multiple pack CALs that you can purchase. You can buy them through the OEM channel, and you just basically buy enough to cover what the client needs. As to the per device versus per user CAL option, that's really going to depend on the customer, maybe even the department within the customer, for example. There's no hard and fast rule, but in general, though, in today's world where people tend to have more devices, they've got different things that they're connecting to, not just their desktop PC, they might have a laptop, they might have a tablet, etc. So, we're in more of a multi-device environment these days. So for a lot of people, the per user CAL starts making more sense. But in environments where there's things like shift work and people are sharing multiple machines, it might be the email machine on the factory floor, for example, that 20 or 30 people use over the course of a day. Okay, that's where the per device CALs make more sense. So the user CALs and device CALs are listed here. So we just, we covered those, so there's no need to recap on those. But with the other question that comes up quite a lot is around remote desktop services. So even though nothing has really changed from this side of the RDS licensing for quite a while, for people who are new to Windows Server licensing, a question comes up a lot, such as, well, if I buy an RDS CAL, or if I want to use RDS, do I need an RDS cal? Then the answer is yes, unless you're just doing it as one of the admin logins, not for general productivity purposes. The other question that comes up quite a lot is, well, if I buy an RDS cal, do I still need a user cal or a device cal? And the answer is yes, because if you think about am I connecting to a server in the network, and the answer is yes with RDS, so you will need that cal. And that's noted down there in that darker gray box in the bottom right hand side. Remote desktop services requires a Windows Server cal and an RDS cal. And this is something that hasn't really changed in a very long time, but it's still a very common question that we do receive. So some of the facts about Windows Server cals, well, we've covered a lot of these, so let's just go through them quickly. So they're not included with the base product. That was something that stopped with Windows Server 2008 R2 Standard and Data Center and Enterprise. Customers need to buy cals, user cals or device cals. The cals work in conjunction with the server license. Cals aren't needed for unauthenticated access through the internet. Device cals as well as RDS cals, as we just mentioned, and cals are version specific. So what happens with cals is that it will generally be something where, if we use Windows Server 2012 as an example, if you are moving from Server 2008 to Server 2012, you'd need to buy new cals during that process. When Server 2012 R2, so when the R2 versions of products come out, then there's no need to buy new cals. So you can use the 2012 cal with 2012 R2. But now that 2016 is coming out, because it's a whole new generation of Windows Server, when you deploy that first Windows Server 2016 server into a customer environment, the customer will also need to have the corresponding number of Windows Server 2016 cals. So just make sure that that your customer is aware of that. So now let's get to the end of this recording, so the resources and further information. So probably the big one here is that we've got a roadshow coming up where we'll have 3 different sessions during the day. There'll be a partner and customer launch breakfast, which will start run from 8:30 to 11 type thing. But then we'll also, after that, we'll switch into partner only mode for a few more hours, and we'll have a Server 2016 session that's much more focused on SMB content for the OEM reseller channel. So this is where we'll talk about the ROK options, the pre-install options, the system builder channel, basically the things where we'll talk about those. It won't be a volume license conversation, and there's probably not going to be too much of a data center conversation. It's really going to focus very heavily on standard, and maybe even just a quick update on Essentials, so that you've got an idea of what's new and what's changed between Essentials 2012 R2 and Essentials 2016. So the dates are listed here, and if you keep an eye on blogs.technet.microsoft.com, by the time you see this, the website should be live. You should be able to register, and hopefully we get to see you in one of these locations. Now, for those of you who aren't in one of the capital cities that's listed there, we will be recording these after we finish the roadshow. So we'll make them available probably through Smart HQ or and through our YouTube channel. So I'll have So once we do that, we'll make sure that you know about that, because we definitely want you to see it. So some of the upcoming events. The first one, the Australian Partner Conference. It's probably going to, there's probably a good chance that it's already occurred by the time you get to watch this. But it's important to note that, they make a lot of the content from this available, so a lot of the presentations. So if you want to get an idea of, what Microsoft Australia's big goals, what their strategies are, what products they are really going to be focusing on, so that if you do want to work closely with Microsoft, taking a look at that content is really going to give you a good idea of that. For those of you who are more technically minded, and that first part of today's session was more your liking and you want more details, that's where sessions or events like Microsoft Ignite, which happens in February next year on the Gold Coast, that's where there'll be a lot of deep dive content, including Windows Server 2016 capabilities. So the resources that we've got Smart HQ, which is designed for basically Microsoft's OEM and System Builder reseller channel, and it's got marketing information, links to technical information. There's a lot of good stuff there. If you're more technically minded, keep an eye on the Australian OEM team blog site where on a pretty regular basis I'm putting new posts up. If you're looking at trying to find out, well, I just want to know what's new in Windows Server 2016 Standard Edition, then go there. We've got, as I mentioned, there's an 11-part article series that I've put up there that covers that. And if you do have pre-sales, if you do need pre-sales information on the OEM server products, and now with Server 2016, I'm sure we'll see an influx of new and different types of questions, please reach out to us at oemserverau@microsoft.com, and we'll make sure that we get answers out to you very, very quickly. So I'm sure that email alias is going to become much more active than it's been due to this new launch and all the different events that we're going to be running. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining today's call, and it will be great to see you at some of these events in person as we start rolling out through the country over the coming months. So thank you.